Hey everybody, this is Robert from Black Belt Gaming. My allergies are bugging me a little bit tonight, so I apologize if you hear me gasping for air or if my voice sounds strange. I wanted to make another entry into my Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition series. This is a series where I'm sort of looking at the rule books now, many years later, and finding bits and pieces in them that I never even knew were in the game. A lot of what I'm doing also is taking a look back at how I learned the game and sort of remembering fondly some of the sessions I had together with my friends back in the early 80s. So I hope you'll stick with me tonight as I sort of touch on one or two issues that I discussed in my last video about the feel of first edition AD&D, and then maybe add another point or two tonight. As I touched on in my previous video, our characters were very often driven by their lust for treasure. We were treasure hunters. There was even a rule in the rule books about how one experience point could come from one piece of gold. And so 500 gold pieces would transfer over into 500 experience points. Many of our games, well, we were all sort of passionate players, but we were casual players as well, meaning that we often had different practices and sort of other outside interests. Many of us were athletes, and we would play when we had a chance, and we didn't have time for really complicated campaigns and stories. We tended to play one-shots more than anything else. And a quick way to get us together and moving right away was kind of to pull us together in a tavern. Someone either hires us or we overhear something about some great treasure or potential for treasure in some dangerous place. And we band together and set off to try to find our fortune. It reminds me a lot of the story in the old Conan story, The Tower of the Elephant, where I believe Conan was sitting in a tavern and he overhears about this sorcerer's tower, and inside that tower is a huge jewel, very valuable, called the Heart of the Elephant. And Conan decides he's going to rob the tower, so he sets off on his own. On his way, he does meet up with another thief who's also attempting the same robbery, and they join together and climb up into the tower and get into all sorts of trouble. So that was kind of a common theme with our games, just the way we pulled together and what our motivation was. There occasionally may be, the save the princess kind of thing where we were given a reward to do this, that, or the other. But we didn't have these grand stories and some story arc that carried over from one session to another, because we really, honestly, we really played each game like each game was going to be our last. So we wanted to make it count, and we didn't know when the next time was going to come that we could all get together. And so our characters, sure, when we leveled them up, we brought them back next time. But our backstory for those characters was not something that we wrote beforehand. Our story became the tales that we told about the adventures that we had survived. And that's sort of bringing me over into the next point. I had mentioned before that one of the things that felt really first edition to me was the need for characters to play smartly. You needed to be clever, and you needed to be very involved in the scene, ask a lot of questions. You almost had to be somewhat of a detective to survive and get through the different encounters. So a lot of it was what you may have heard described of as player skill rather than just character skill. Sometimes these days, in role-playing games, especially when people are first starting, it's very easy just to throw out a challenge for the characters. They look at their character sheet, they find the right skill and roll the dice, and success or fail, you move the story forward. Back when we played, we didn't have a lot of these different skills to reference. So we sort of had to play them out. Thieves, for example, had certain skills, how to pick locks and listen for noise and that kind of thing. But it was very important what equipment you had with you and how you made use of that equipment. So if you wanted to climb, you needed that rope and hook. If you wanted to pick the lock, you needed the set of thieves' tools to do that. If you wanted to slam a door and keep it shut from a group of goblins that were chasing you, you needed some way to bar the door. Sometimes that's when those good old iron spikes came into use, where you would spike the door shut. And components. If you saw my video about the magic user, a magic user's components, we often role played those as well. And a lot of people these days, I think, see those kind of things about their adventuring gear and spell components and other things, even ammunition, as a pain to keep track of. But for us in our games, that was part of the fun. Managing your resources. And you had resources in the tools that you were using, and then you had your other spells. You had to be very careful when you used a spell, because once you cast that spell for the day, it was gone. And then you had to be very careful with the charges and your magic items, and you had to be careful with your ammunition. And it was just, could you manage everything well to get through the adventure and survive until the end, and come out at the end and level up and be stronger in the future. So it was a game, but it was fun, and managing those resources, including your hit points, was part of the fun of survival. What I wanted to talk about next was mystery. The games for us were full of mystery, the unknown. We did not know what to expect from one session to another. Very few of us had all of the books. I remember I had my character sheet, and that was it for a good while before I ever gathered up enough money to purchase the player's handbook. And then I had that for a while. And I even started to DM sessions before I even had the Dungeon Master's Guide. I think I had the Monster Manual first. So a lot of things were mysterious. I didn't know about what monsters existed in the Dungeons and Dragons universe. I had no idea about the different magic items and artifacts and what they could do. That was a lot of fun for us. It made the game very exciting. And also, different dungeon masters would create their own creatures and their own character classes and their own magic items, and the game seemed to encourage that creativity. So there was this great sense of wonder and excitement about the game. And that may have been just because it was new to me. I had certainly never played anything like this. Every other game that I had played before, it had clear limitations. You had a deck of cards. You could flip through those cards, and maybe you didn't know exactly when a particular card was coming, but you knew what cards were in that deck if you took the time to look. Or if you were playing on a board, you may not know exactly what number you were going to roll, but you kind of knew if you get to this space, this happens, and if you get to this other space, something else happens. There was a sense of, you kind of knew the limits, but with Dungeons and Dragons, you often didn't. You just didn't know what kind of situation the Dungeon Master was going to put you in from one session to the next. And that was very exciting. It was very scary. and it was just a lot of fun. Here's a picture of Garl Glittergold. I think that was his name. He's from the Deities and Demigods book. This was a book that was sitting on the table one night. I think it was at the end of a session that we'd played. And I'd never seen this book. It caught my eye because it had a purple cover, sort of a purplish color to it. And I started flipping through it, and I remember coming across Garl Glittergold here. He's the god of the gnomes. And I was just checking out the different entries in the book, and my friend, who was about 4 years older than I was, he's one of the guys that introduced me to the game. He started talking about this god, and he started talking about him as if he was a real person. Now, we were both not, we weren't delusional. We understood this was a game. But what I'm saying is that there was just an excitement to the Dungeons and Dragons gameplay, that when we were talking about Garl, he seemed like a real entity in that world. We didn't know how he was going to interact with us. So as my friend was talking, he was talking about his gnome character who worshipped Garl Glittergold and would often pay tributes to him in, I don't know if it was temples or what. And he was always hoping that he would receive Garl's blessings or good fortune, or even be visited by Garl Glittergold sometime in an adventure. And it was just fascinating to listen to him talk about this. And, you know, when I think about sharing this conversation with other people, it sounds as if we were absolutely nuts or just uber geeks. But it was a lot of fun for us, and it really sounded, it really just was exciting to listen to. It was just very interesting to listen to. And as I continued to look through this book, I saw different heroes and different monsters and gods from all kinds of different mythologies around the world. Entries about King Arthur, others about Japan, and it just really stimulated me to learn more about these different cultures and their stories. And so it did a lot for me academically. As a young athlete, and really enjoy playing outdoors and being involved in martial arts and soccer and many other things, I was not one that liked to curl up on the couch with a good book. But this interested me. And so it actually made me start checking out things at the library and wanting to learn more about the ancient Greeks. And I remember I was always excited about this folklore and this mythology when we came to that section in our history class at school. And this continued on through college and graduate school. And so Dungeons and Dragons, I guess you could say, was a big part of what helped transform me into a good student later on in life. So that was just part of the wonder and excitement of AD&D First Edition. I know I could just continue to go on and on and on about things, but I probably ought to start wrapping it up here. The Dungeons and Dragons adventures and the game, once again, was just unlike anything else I had ever played. And it was really a great way for me and my friends to come together and have such an amazing outlet for our creativity, ways that we could come up with interesting characters and interesting stories, ways that kind of motivated us to check out different movies and books and learn more about the world and history and arms and armor and legends and lore, and pull all of these things into our game so that we could entertain our friends the next time we played together. And I know that's still part of Dungeons and Dragons today. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist today, but it was definitely part of my experience playing first edition AD&D, and I have very fond memories of it. And I give the DMs that I played with, the guys that introduced me to the game, I give them a lot of credit for how well they just pulled us all into the story and made it so exciting, at times really terrifying, and it just made it so much fun that I've never forgotten about it. And I have kind of kept the role playing hobby in my life ever since then. And it's been a long time now. So thanks for listening, everybody. I would be interested to hear any comments you may have in the comment section. I'd like to do some more videos, of course, on AD&D and continue a little bit more about the feel of first edition. Probably what I'll do next is maybe a video on what it was like to be a dungeon master in first edition AD&D. So once again, thanks for listening, everybody, and I'll catch you more for some AD&D fun later.